Archimedes, one of the greatest mathematicians and inventors of the ancient world, met a tragic end during the Roman conquest of Syracuse in 212 BCE. Context of the siege. Archimedes lived in the city of Syracuse, a Greek settlement on the island of Sicily. During the Second Punic War, Syracuse allied with Carthage against Rome. The Roman general Marcus Claudius Marcellus led a prolonged siege of the city. Archimedes, despite being an elderly man by this time, played a crucial defensive role by designing powerful war machines that reportedly held off the Roman forces for years, including catapults, cranes, and possibly even devices to set ships on fire using mirrors. The circumstances of his death. When the Romans eventually breached the defenses and captured Syracuse, Marcellus had reportedly given orders that Archimedes should not be harmed, wishing to spare the great scientist. However, as the story goes, Archimedes was so absorbed in his mathematical work, possibly drawing diagrams in the sand, that he ignored or rebuffed a Roman soldier's orders. Offended or impatient, the soldier killed him on the spot. His famous last words are often cited as, "Do not disturb my circles." Though this is likely apocryphal, it symbolizes his deep dedication to intellectual pursuit, even in the face of death. Archimedes' death became emblematic of the tragic collision between brute force and intellectual brilliance, a narrative that echoed through the centuries and helped cement his legacy not only as a scientific genius, but as a symbol of the purity and vulnerability of the life of the mind. Roman admiration and Marcellus's regret. Despite his death at Roman hands, Archimedes was deeply admired by many Romans. General Marcellus, who had allegedly ordered that Archimedes be spared, was said to be grieved by the killing and later ensured he was buried with honor. A tomb was erected in Syracuse, reportedly bearing a sculpture of a sphere inscribed within a cylinder, a visual tribute to Archimedes' discovery that the volume of a sphere is 2/3 that of the cylinder in which it fits, a result he considered his greatest. Centuries later, the Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero, while serving as quaestor in Sicily around 75 BCE, famously searched for and located Archimedes' neglected tomb, overgrown and forgotten. He recounted this act proudly, noting how the Sicilians had allowed such a great man's resting place to be lost to memory, and how a Roman had restored it. Medieval obscurity and Renaissance revival. In the medieval period, much of Archimedes' work was preserved in Arabic translation, though he remains somewhat obscure in Europe. It was only with the revival of Greek mathematical texts in the Renaissance that Archimedes' genius was fully recognized once more. Thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci and Galileo Galilei drew inspiration from him, seeing in his geometrical methods and mechanical insights a powerful bridge between pure thought and applied science. Enlightenment and the modern image. During the Enlightenment, Archimedes became a central figure in the narrative of rational progress. Writers and philosophers invoked him as an exemplar of the scientific mind, often contrasting him with the perceived superstition and violence of the past. Voltaire, for instance, lamented that such a mind could be extinguished by a mere soldier's blade, reinforcing the image of Archimedes as a martyr of reason. In the modern age, his name endures in engineering principles, like Archimedes' screw, physics laws, Archimedes' principle of buoyancy, and in the cultural memory of the Eureka moment, the tale of him discovering the principle of displacement while taking a bath. Archimedes' death has echoed powerfully in literature and art as a dramatic symbol of the triumph of violence over intellect, the fragility of genius, and the tragedy of war. His final moment, often romanticized, stylized, or mythologized, has provided generations of writers, artists, and philosophers with a potent scene in which reason is interrupted by force. Classical and early sources. While the earliest accounts, such as those by Plutarch and Livy, are relatively restrained, they already frame Archimedes' death as tragic and unjust. Plutarch's Life of Marcellus portrays Marcellus as devastated by the killing and reverent toward Archimedes, which laid the foundation for later retellings that cast the Roman general as a noble figure thwarted by the ignorance of a common soldier. Renaissance and Enlightenment literature. As classical humanism reawakened in the Renaissance, Archimedes became a figure of moral and philosophical reflection. Writers and thinkers drew parallels between his fate and the fragile status of the thinker or artist in a turbulent world. The Enlightenment, in particular, seized upon his death to explore themes of reason versus barbarism. Voltaire, in his Dictionnaire philosophique, lamented how the world allowed the greatest geometrician of antiquity to be cut down by the hand of a ferocious brute. Here, Archimedes' death becomes a symbol of the world's failure to recognize and protect its greatest minds. Romanticism and the heroic image. In the Romantic era, Archimedes was often cast as a tragic hero, a solitary genius absorbed in abstract thought, oblivious to the destruction around him. Painters and poets imagined him drawing his circles in the sand as soldiers ransacked the city, the world collapsing around a mind caught in the beauty of pure geometry. One particularly influential interpretation came from the German writer Friedrich Schiller, who, in his writings on naive and sentimental poetry, invoked Archimedes as an image of the undistracted, idealized thinker who lives for truth and beauty, unmoved by worldly concerns, until the world cuts him down. Visual art. Artists from the Renaissance onward occasionally depicted Archimedes' death, usually in dramatic, stylized scenes. Paintings typically show an elderly man in robes, hunched over a diagram etched in the dust, as a Roman soldier looms above him, sword raised or mid-strike. These images often place great emphasis on contrast, the soldier's brute force against Archimedes' delicate concentration, the destruction of the city against the quiet persistence of thought. Though not as frequently painted as figures like Socrates or Galileo, Archimedes' death held a special place in art as a moment when intellectual clarity met the chaos of history. A modern symbol. In modern literature and cultural commentary, Archimedes' death is sometimes cited alongside the execution of Socrates or the exile of great thinkers as a recurring tragedy in human civilization, the killing or silencing of those who see too clearly or think too independently. He remains a symbol of how easily knowledge can be extinguished by ignorance and how thin the veil is between intellectual flourishing and violent collapse. Here is a poem inspired by the death of Archimedes, composed in the spirit of Romantic and Enlightenment reflections, blending historical imagination with meditative tone. The Circles in the Sand. For Archimedes, slain at Syracuse. Within the citadel of thought he knelt, unmoved by flame, by trumpet, or by cry, where shattered columns cracked and empires melt. He drew his perfect circles 'neath the sky. The sea wind bore the screaming of the street, the clash of shields, the city's dying moan. Yet in his gaze the lines of form complete, and in his hand the compass moved alone. No blade could cross the arc his mind had traced. No soldier's shout could shake that sacred thread. He, who made stars his playthings, gravity his grace, fell, unresisting, to a sword of lead. "Oh, spare this man," Marcellus's voice had cried. Too late the sand was soaked in silent red, and still those circles whisper where he died. That truth may shine though all the wise lie dead.
forget to hit that subscribe button to show your support.